next part of our lecture is about how languages change and what principles do we observe in the change of languages, dialects, languages, varieties of languages, etc., etc. First of all, we should know principles of historical linguistics. What for do we need a history of the English language as a discipline in training bachelors, teachers of the English language and literature at schools, lyceums, and in higher educational institutions? The first principle, all languages are in a continual process of change. It means all languages change. There's no language which is not changing. If language ceases changing, if the language stops changing, it will very soon die out, because no change leads to the decay, to the death of this language. Because when people use the language undergoes different sorts of changes in the process of functioning, and functional aspect causes some changes for improving the structure and functional aspect of the language. Next, all languages are subject to the same kind of modifying influences. It means these principles are common to Indo-European languages, to Altaic languages, and all other languages, because languages are subject to process of modifying its elements, aspects, etc., etc. Next, language change is regular and systematic, allowing for unhindered communication among speakers. Language changes regularly and systematic. Speaker of the language does not notice the changes taking place in his or her language. Only in the course of some period of time, let's say 50 years, 100 years, they begin noticing that some elements changed in their language. Within 30 or 50 years, and new words appeared. Some grammatical forms changed their ways of expressing, etc., etc. But this don't cannot be an obstacle to the communication. If changes become obstacle to the process of communication, this very soon change it, or it is done by language in internal structure, that such cases very soon they lose their one of them. Imagine two forms appear to express one idea, and a speaker is in difficult to choose one of them. And in such cases, these cases will not last long. See, language itself makes a correction, and one form remains and one form dies out very soon. Language change is regular. We have already said about it. Linguistic and social factors are interrelated in language change. As we said, there are two factors: interlinguistic and extralinguistic factors of language change. Those factors are interrelated in language change. Those geographical factors, social factors, territorial and other factors are related to internal lexical, grammatical, phonetic, etc. factors. They work together. See, the cause of one changes to certain layers in the inner structure of the language. The language systems tend towards as yet unspecified states of economy and redundancy. Language in the language we observe the functioning or the work of two tendencies. Uh, Economy and redundancy. Economy tries uh, to make the language easier, to give two or three meanings for to one word, and redundancy tries to give two or three ways of expressing one idea. And the speaker of the language knows where he comes across with redundancy, it comes across with economy, and language learners should try to find such cases in learning the language. What form is called redundant, and what form is a cause of language economy, and how they work in the language. Now, a few words about methodology, method, technique, and procedures of linguogenetic investigations like uh, history of the English language. What should we pay attention in learning history of the language, any language? The English language, can it be English language, German, French, Italian, Russian, Uzbek, or other languages? The following should be taken into consideration. The first, determining the objective linguistic basis of historical comparative method. It means it's very difficult to learn a history of one language separately in isolation because language is in progress, in development. Once it has very close ties with the languages forming one group. For example, Germanic group language. If we learn the history of the English language, we should have some information about the general principle of development of the German language, Dutch language, Gothic language, Swedish, Norwegian, etc., etc. See, because if we compare the historical facts of those languages and the English language, many laws working in the English language, many forms functioning in the English language become clear from the historical point of view. We understand where did this or that form come from. Next, determining the essential procedures of historical comparative analysis. Here we compare facts of the English language with the facts of Middle English and the Middle English and the Old English. When we compare the forms of modern English, Middle English and Old English, form of one word, we see clearly the changes or traces of the changes which took place in the language. For example, if the word was sunus in Old English and in Middle English sune, in modern English sun, we can see what happened in the words, in the how words developed. This is, I'm giving only one example, but we have hundreds, thousands of words, and if we analyze the history of those words, and we see other laws, and if we summarize those changes, we have different laws of the development of the English language. We see where is the language, where the English language coming, and where is it going. See, this is work, how these procedures, principles work. Next, reconstruction in syntactic level. Why is it important? Because it is important because in modern English we have sentence structure beginning subject, predicate, object, etc. But in Old English we had different structures like subject, object, predicate, predicate, object, subject, etc., etc. And it's strange, it's difficult for learners, for children learning the English language to understand how can it be beginning the sentence with adverbial modifier, then comes predicate, and the subject comes last. But it was a reality of the earlier periods in the history of the English language. Next, reconstruction of the archaic meanings of words. Why is it so important? It's very important because polysemy or uh, many meanings of one word has become a fact of modern English, but in order to denote, to state what meaning is the main meaning, what is the secondary, you should know the development of the meaning. It is done if we know the archaic meanings of the words. If you know the archaic meaning of word, you can uh, easily find out new meanings, and you understand what new words may, what new meanings of the word may come into existence. Make up. See, in the course of discourse and native speakers use those words, and those learners who are not familiar with the history of this word, history of the meanings of this word, don't understand new shades of meaning, new meanings of this or that word. Therefore, reconstruction of archaic meanings is very important in linguistics and in the course of history of the English language. Next comes a reconstruction of parent language. Parent language, as we have already said, is a language from which the language we are learning developed. For the English language, parent language is a Proto-Germanic or Germanic proto-parent language, and which developed from Proto-Indo-European. Uh, and linguists reconstruct the parent language. They determine what phonemes existed in parent language or common Germanic language, what phonemes, what consonants, what phonetic processes existed in parent language, and what of them remained and what forms survived, what phonemes died out, etc., etc. The same is done with the grammatical structure, morphemes, etc. This is reconstruction of the parent language is important to describe modern living languages. Next, using toponymical material. Toponymical material means names of countries, cities, towns, rivers, deserts, steppes, mountains, hills, etc., etc. Lakes, rivers, I have already said. They give us material to know what forms, what words were used in the English language 1,000 years ago or 100 or 500 years ago, etc., etc., because they give us information about yesterday's state of these language vocabulary. This is therefore toponymic material is very important for understanding the linguo-cultural aspect of the language. Next, the method of internal reconstruction. This is done by the linguist or learner to understand from what word the word we are interested in developed. And here we should remember those Grimm's law, Werner's law, Schmidt's law, and other laws in order to find corresponding types of changes for reconstruction. Next, using quantitative methods. Quantitative methods are used when we discuss the functional aspect of the words in this or that language. And when we say about the number of people speaking this or that dialect, or number of people speaking this or that language, or language group, etc., etc. This is very important to state whether should we use these dialects seriously, or we should have some general information that would be enough. You see. Next, using typological features of the language universals. Typologists worked out different language universals, and sometimes it's very useful to use some of them in describing the facts of history of the English language, because here we will have to compare facts of the English language with the German, Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, Afrikaans, and other languages. Here we need the methods or universals worked out by the linguists, typologists. Next, using the material of other languages, the same, in order to illustrate different laws like first consonant shift, second consonant shift, and other changes, we need the material of other languages, like material of the Latin language, Greek language, Slavic languages, Romance languages, Celtic languages and other languages, because they give information about the form which survived from common Indo-European or common Germanic state. Applying the methods of linguistic geography. This item is very important when we discuss the dialects. And here we discuss, for example, if Old English has the four dialects: Northumbrian dialect, Wessex dialect, Kentish dialect, etc. Here we discuss where these dialects were used and who spoke those Northumbrian dialect, or who spoke that Kentish dialect, etc., etc. These are the facts of linguistic geography as a method of investigation in linguistics and in the history of the English language. And a few words about mechanisms and laws of linguistic change. It means how languages change, what laws govern the linguistic changes. The first, conventionality of language development. If the language is functioning, it is due to development. It should develop. If it should not develop, it will cease functioning as a means of communication, and it will very soon die out. The longest period of function of one form is stated by linguists as 500 years. After 500 years, either language changes and takes another form, or it dies out. That depends on the degree of language change in this. Next, the influence of the change in social factors to the change of the language development. It's one of the important moments of language change, because social factors influence the language development greatly. As we know, social factors we can name as wars, invasions, occupations, revolutions, etc., etc. And these facts influence the fate of millions of people, and those millions are speakers of different languages. And as a result of invasion, some million people are liquidated, we can say literally. It means the language spoken by those people also ceases to be used, because no speaker, no language. Next, external and internal history of the language. This is closely related to what I have just said. Language development is related to external and internal history of the society where this language is used. Different factors in the external and internal history of language influence the language development. They can be a good condition for the language development, or they can be very poor, bad conditions for the development of the language. You know the result waiting for this language in different conditions. Next, changes taking place in the speech. And speech, in the speech of this individuals or people speaking this language, we observe different sorts of changes which appear under the influence of other languages or different changes in the social linguistic situation, lingual cultural uh, situation, diversity, etc., etc. And these uh, of course, not all of them can be element of the language, but still changes make some effect to the formation of the vocabulary, for the enriching of the vocabulary from other languages, taking words. Quantitative and qualitative characteristics of linguistic changes. Not all the changes can be noted as quantitative or qualitatively notable or important. See, some changes can be very few, took part in very few words or elements of the language, and some changes may cause the qualitative change in the language greatly. That depends on the time, on the type of the effect or influences to the language structure. Next, notion of linguistic laws. We mentioned that in the language we observe the work of linguistic laws like Grimm's law, Werner's law, Bayes' law, Wundt's law, etc., etc. They work, but a separate speaker, individual speaker, does not notice that he's following the statements of this or that law. It has become a form of the linguistic behavior of that person. He does not think that he's working or he's speaking according to this or that law. He knows it. It is programmed in his brain. The causes and results of language, economy of language means. Of course, speaker um, speaker tries to economize, to use fewer force or power to express more idea. Therefore, he tries to use shorter words, shorter constructions, etc., etc. For example, in order to pronounce prison, he uses jail. Of course, they are synonyms, but still they have their specific meanings. But a common speaker sometimes uses this one. A word consisting of one syllable is better than the word consisting of two syllables. Next, internal history of the language as a development of the grammatical structure of the language. Here we mentioned grammatical structure of the language. Grammatical structure of the language as one of the is the most conservative part of language structure. Um, uh, does not change greatly because we have already said change of the grammatical structure causes a change of the language itself, and no one in the world likes using today one language, tomorrow another language, and therefore grammatical structure remains stable. But still, in the course of time, in the course of 100 years or 50, 100 or 200 years, there appear some changes in the grammatical structure. But still, those are minor changes to compare with the pronunciation and vocabulary of the language. I think that's all for today. This was the end of our lecture. Thank you for your attention.